Welcome to this week's edition of Two Men in the Middle, where two men talk about politics, current events, everything under the sun, culture. I'm Brandon Kinnig.
I'm Craig Huey.
So, Craig, first thing, we had the death of Colin Powell, which took over the news for the most part over the last several days in terms of defining his legacy, talking about him, how he should be remembered and regarded, particularly because of his role in his later years and warning against the direction of the Republican Party and where it was going under Trump. He kind of basically took on this elder statesman role. One thing we were talking offline about is that he had gone on this speaking tour circuit with Madeleine Albright and warning about the dangers of autocracy and authoritarianism and how the United States was, in danger of succumbing to that and how we needed to keep our guard up. But you also have Iraq, and you have the legacy of what he did as Secretary of State in the Bush administration and his performance before the UN. And so how do you reconcile all of that? When is the best time to bring that up? And how do you piece together someone's legacy when they do have major blemishes, black marks, as well as positive things, particularly later in life?
Yeah, Colin Powell's legacy it's complicated, and there's a progressive wing of the Democrat Party that absolutely sees him as a war criminal, was kind of held it against Obama that he didn't go after more of the Bush cabinet, specifically Powell, Rumsfeld, Cheney, as war criminals in Iraq. I think that's a little bit of a bridge too far. But I don't know how you take somebody and look at the totality of their career when the one bad thing they did was a really, really bad thing. And I guess I don't know, how do you assign weight to Colin Powell's career? Did what he did later in life, in his statesman role and his acting as a kind of a sanity check to the Republican Party, which was all needed, but how do you weigh that against what he did at the UN and what he did in the lead up to the Iraqi war? And I guess for me, I always blame Powell more because Powell was the adult in the room. Powell was the one with military experience. Powell was part of the first Bush administration. He was part of the Clinton administration. And Powell knew exactly who Rumsfeld and Cheney was. He had a moment in history where he could have stood up and really kind of cemented what his legacy could have been, but instead he chose a different path. And there's a lot of debate. Was his speech at the UN, was that all based off bad intel he got? That's how he kind of played it off later on in his career. I just don't think that holds water.
Well, and if you read Bob Woodward's book about what was going on, the internal machinations of the Bush administration, Powell was in opposition. Yeah. And there was internal conflict because he did not agree with going to war with Iraq. And he lost that battle, obviously, with the hawks in the administration. So, yeah, there is some question, on obviously he knew, that there wasn't the case, and yet he still went and defended and attempted to make that case, even knowing that, the evidence was lacking.
Is it fair to say Powell allowed himself to be used?
I think so. I think to some degree. I mean, we can argue about, how much and to what extent, but yes, he did.
And I sent you an article that I was reading after I heard about his death, when I knew we were going to have to talk about this, and people were already kind of savaging his legacy. The thing Trump sent out, that's just dumb, stupid, crass, uncalled for, and just ridiculous. His statement from 45 on his blog or whatever he made, that was just dumb.
Well, and that's Trump's modus operandi. He will go after anybody that takes the limelight away from him. If it had been Madeleine Albright who passed away, he would have found some way to diminish her. That's what he does, and so he will tend to find whatever tends to get the most traction and use that.
But in the article that I sent you, it talked about how what he really did, what Colin Powell really did at that UN speech, is he turned the Iraqi invasion from a war of choice to a war of necessity, because he made the linkage that that part of Iraq was linked to al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and they were part of what attacked us on 9/11. And he mentions Zakari. I'm not even going to try to get his name right because I won't. He mentions basically this terrorist inside Iraq, and he mentions him 21 times in his speech. And basically, Zakari becomes the connection between Osama bin Laden and Afghanistan and al-Qaeda and Iraq. I mean, everybody remembers the yellow cake and the little vial that he brought with him as a prop to the UN. What is lost in that speech is really where he lays out the case. When we're attacking Iraq, we are attacking the people that attacked us on 9/11. That is 100% false. And there is no convincing that, at least I can be convinced, that he didn't know that was false.
It's interesting that you go there because often that gets overlooked because most people focus on the weapons of mass destruction claim.
Yes.
And because that was the overarching reason and rationale that was made that in the post 9/11 world, we had to confront these rogue regimes that had weapons of mass destruction because they could get in the hands of terrorist organizations like al-Qaeda. But you're right, because the underlying argument to that was that the al-Qaeda connection and going wherever al-Qaeda was. And so that's what also gave that weapons of mass destruction WMD claim even more legitimacy, was by saying that, al-Qaeda was operating in Iraq and could get a hold of those WMDs.
And I sent you that article because that article has the tell. For Colin Powell to say in that UN speech in an interview years later, which he's been asked about word for word for that speech 1,000 times in his life, for Colin Powell to play the "I don't even remember talking about him" card, that just tells you he's lying. As sharp as Colin Powell is, as articulate as Colin Powell is, you mean to tell me somebody he mentioned in his UN speech, the critical point of his life and his career, he doesn't remember mentioning Zakari 21 times? That's a lie. That's just a lie. That's the tell that he was there to sell something that day that he did not believe in. And if you listen to the progressives part, that lie had something to do, or played at least some small part in, millions of Iraqi civilians dying. How do you weight that in his legacy? How do you say, is that 80% of it? Is it 20% of it? If you line out all of the things he's done in his life that define Colin Powell, how do you weight that one thing that had such tragic consequences for America, for the Middle East? It decentralized an entire portion of the world. It created a refugee crisis in Europe. How do you say, okay, the rest of this is pretty good, and I guess this is bad, but we'll give you a pass because there's a lot of good here?
Well, and the problem I have is the timing. I mean, he hasn't even been buried yet, and so I really have a problem with progressives going after him and picking everything apart, because there's going to be plenty of time to do that, and obviously textbooks will be written, there'll be books, and that his legacy will be defined in time. But the question I have is, and we're talking about great lies throughout history that have led to military interventions and conflicts, American entanglement. I mean, there's been many. He's not the first. I mean, you can go back to Johnson with the Gulf of Tonkin incident. You can go back to Iran-Contra, which had led to a war, but also caused massive scandal. And, that there was deceit at the heart of that. And so where do you stop? Because there's been plenty of, in the Vietnam War itself entirely. I mean, the Pentagon Papers. I mean, you had multiple presidents that were involved in that cover-up. So, but again, in the past, we haven't defined entire presidencies or entire cabinet secretaries by those incidents. So do we do that now? Is that just kind of where we are as a society?
I think the change is that in the recent past, we were engaged in American myth making. We wanted to make mythical creatures, men mostly, into these myths about how good they were and how right they were and how righteous they are. And that's part of the American ideal and the American experience. That just feels completely kind of naive right now. Yeah. And I'm not saying that's a good change. I'm just saying it's obvious we've made this change. We are not looking to build... We're not looking to myth make around politicians, generals, military people anymore in the United States. And I think Colin Powell's death and people's reaction to it is a sign of that. We're just not going to take somebody. I mean, LBJ, anybody that was involved in the Vietnam War, do they deserve a statue? I can't. Why?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think that one's pretty obvious. Like, no.
I mean, Colin Powell was involved, I think, in one of the worst military mistakes this country's ever made. He deserves what for that? I don't know. Praise, scorn, ignored. I don't know. Like you, I don't know what the rules are right now to how do you evaluate somebody's legacy. And Colin Powell's is so close, and we're not going to give it any time. How are these rules changed on us?
True, but again, you have to. I guess that's one, although albeit major episode in his lifespan, but it's one, right? I mean, he had a distinguished,
but it's the
career of
right?
public service. His Gulf War service, which was, I mean, so where it's major, but. Is that the line? So you just leave it at a kind of 2-line summary of his.
I come back to again. If you laid everything he ever did out on the table, how do you weight it out? Because you can't weight what he did around Iraq and what he did that has to have more significance than some of the other things that he did within his career. And I think that's what we're trying to sort through is how do you look at some of this good stuff, but how do you balance it out with the disaster that was the Iraq War? And what I really dislike about Colin Powell in his later years is, yes, he somewhat took responsibility, but it was always, I failed because somebody else failed, right? The intelligence was bad. Or he did I was following orders. The president wanted this. I delivered this for the president. I never got the sense that Powell took personal responsibility. It's one of the reasons why this war happened was a personal failure on my part to stand up to Cheney and Rumsfeld. And if I would have done a better job of that, even to the point where I would have quit because I do not believe the intelligence community, I failed at doing that. That's an apology to me.
Okay, but I disagree that would have changed anything. I mean, we would have gone to war regardless. I mean,
I agree. But he
was outnumbered completely in terms of the administration and the cohort that were battle ready.
So to me, we give him another demerit because when the chips were down and we really needed Colin Powell, right? When we really needed the myth of what Colin Powell was, it was right at that moment. And what did he do? He did what 99% of other people who we don't make myths about did. He knuckled under to pressure and he went along with the group. Why is that something to praise? I just don't. I've always struggled with Colin Powell. I just don't get it.
Well, yeah, I agree. I don't know that, and again, I think that mythologizing him is a bridge too far. But I mean, I think it's one thing to recognize that, philosophically and, where he comes from politically is a dying breed in America, and recognizing that and just saying that that's admirable. But of course, taking the obviously black mark of Iraq out of that, because that was something he'll never live down. I mean, that's going to be
what I heard you say there, Brandon, and tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm putting words in your mouth. You really just miss politicians like Colin Powell.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody who was a gentleman, who could present himself in a way that wasn't embarrassing. Who was, at a baseline, I think, an honest person and could articulate things that American people could understand. I think,
and who at his core was a pragmatist. He cared about governing. I think in terms of work and in terms of public office, like he had a certain set of ethics that he abided by. Like there were all of these, I think, qualities that have gone by the wayside.
How do you say that when his biggest checkbox is a massive lie? This is the struggle when we get into Jefferson. How can we say these people are ethical, moral examples, and then say, but you just have to ignore this big giant thing they did? I think that's where we're struggling here. I cannot put that tag on Colin Powell when at the center of his career is this massively dishonest, unethical thing he did.
Well, and I think part of it is I think we fail to contextualize to some degree, these situations. Yeah. I mean, we're always viewing them by today's lens, and not saying we shouldn't, but there are factors that are, I think that are outside of what we know now. It's easy to have 20/20 hindsight and look back at the accumulation of everything we know now and be like, this was a mistake. And Iraq was obviously a mistake, but there were many people that were involved in peddling the falsehoods. There was a coordinated effort. There was this run-up to war that was just, even the media was very much behind. It was almost a frenzy. I mean, to the point when actually the shock and awe campaign started. I mean, it was just, covered nonstop.
Jesse Ventura on CNN before he was governor talking about bombs and Navy SEAL activities. It was high entertainment.
Yeah, and what was interesting, if you go back to that period, there were very few voices in opposition. And even in mainstream media, most of them did not have any type of platform or pedestal. I mean, they were almost completely shut out. I mean, the drumbeat to war was just almost universal. And so I think, yes, we need to blame those that could have done more and that were involved, but also culturally and as society as a whole, I mean, we immediately bought into it, and there's a lot that we failed to do in terms of asking the questions that should have been asked, and we just went along with it because I think we were at a time also that we were ready to bomb anybody because
somebody was going to get
somebody was going to pay,
yeah.
And despite our intervention in Afghanistan, we still had that mindset. Like, we were not out of that.
I agree with that. I guess Jonah Goldberg is fond of saying that current events change history. And I think it's fair to say that Colin Powell is getting a rougher ride of it about his legacy because of our recent current events with Trump and our recent kind of at this point where everybody's just collectively ready to gag over almost anybody in politics right now. I think certainly that the moment that we are in the present, it really colors some of the things of his legacy and looking back at the past. And if we hadn't just gone through Trump and through even the Afghanistan pullout and some of this other crap that we've been through, he probably would not be looked at maybe so harshly in this light at this point.
I think you're right. And I think it'll be telling to see, especially those that are getting up there in age, some of those statesmen and appointees, former presidents, once they do pass away, how we do view them and what their legacies look like, because I think it is different. I think that compared to 5, even 10 years ago, where we are now as a society in the post-Trump era, which I hate to even say post-Trump because we're still, matter-of-factly, in the Trump era.
What if we're in the paused Trump era, where this is just a little pause waiting for Trump to come back?
Right, and that's, I think, what scares me most is that's, I think, most likely.
Well, what really sucks about this, Brad, is at least we have 275 more years to debate this, because now we're going back at New York is looking at a statue of Thomas Jefferson, which I believe it's in the Assembly House or something.
So, I know this is City Council. This is the New York, so municipal building, so I think it's City Hall. So there's a statue of Thomas Jefferson that enough council members have voted that they want to have removed. The issue is they haven't found a place for it yet, so I think that's still undetermined.
And wasn't this statue, it was somewhere else in that building before it was there? Because I think they've talked about moving it before, but they didn't. So this is something they've at least debated at some point in time. True.
So they've debated before it. So now we're at the point where, again, all of these figures are being reevaluated. But it is a statue of a president. So the idea, I mean, if we take this, further and have statues of Jefferson removed from all public places, there's actually a number of many statues of Jefferson throughout America in public buildings on the state, county, local levels. So how far do you go down that angle? I know locally, for those who don't know, Jackson County, Missouri is named after Andrew Jackson. And there was a big argument about removing the statue of Andrew Jackson in front of the county courthouse, I believe. So, but I don't know. I feel like we often talk about this, and I think this is the logical criticism that some on the right have, is that it starts with removing statues of those where there's universal condemnation or abhorrence about, but then it's a slippery slope, and then it's where does it end, and where do we take this? And I think a good example is it was several months ago, San Francisco was looking at renaming all of their schools, even schools that were named after Abraham Lincoln, because it found that these people were, no longer in vogue. And the effort ran into some problems because they have some of the alternatives that they proposed. And I don't know if you remember this. One of them was an African American, but then it was found out that it was an African American who had anti-gay sentiment, and so then
can't have him,
right? So
or her.
It's like, how, again, where does it stop? And so it can quickly get out of hand, particularly, I mean, Abraham Lincoln, really? So he's no longer viable in terms of namesake?
I don't know what your complaint with Lincoln could be, but you could definitely have some legitimate good faith complaints with Thomas Jefferson. I mean, Jefferson, I think I've talked about this on the pod before. I remember growing up, there was a Lifetime movie on. And I think it was called like Tom and Sally or something, the Sally Hemingway story.
Yeah.
And it was a love story. It was a Lifetime romance where the two central characters were Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemingway. Sally Hemingway was the Thomas Jefferson slave who he fathered several children by. A slave woman cannot give consent. That's rape.
Right.
Thomas Jefferson let his children from Sally Hemingway die in slavery, die in bondage. That's not very good. I mean, again, how do you present a port, or do you just say we're just honored, this statue honors this, and that's it? I don't know how you do this. Somebody could stand in front of me and I think make a good faith argument why a statue of Thomas Jefferson should be removed that I would be somewhat sympathetic to, but. But to your point, so we just take everybody down? We have no history? Nothing exists? I don't know what the answer to this is.
Well, and I guess I just want to know, like, what the criteria is, because without any overarching criteria, like, it doesn't end. I mean, it's a slippery slope that just continues. And that is, I think, the argument that's made by some, which actually has some teeth and resonates with some people, is that, where does it end? I think that we can all agree, yes, statues to Confederate generals that were put up in the post-war era specifically to perpetuate this new narrative about the South. Like, clearly, those should be removed. Those aren't historical. Those were done with a specific intention that aligned with segregation in the post-slavery era. So those should be removed. But then when you look at statues beyond that, are we like any historical figure that has anything that's questionable, anybody that has a colonial tie, even if they did some good? There was controversy over a statue of Junipero Serra, who was I believe, a Franciscan friar that came with the Spanish in America, solely because of his ties to the colonial invaders. Even though he was known for doing a lot of good stuff and for opening schools and teaching indigenous children. But again, so there's shades of gray, and so where do you draw the lines here? Is it just is it anybody by virtue of association?
Is there any historical figure you could think of under today's rubric that somebody wouldn't find offensive? Because what you just said there about the Franciscan monk, so he taught white religion to a bunch of indigenous people. I find that horrible. This is what I'm saying.
Right.
How do you, or is the goal to basically say we're going to change the current in the United States by selectively rewriting or erasing parts of our past? And are we somewhat saying that if these people that we've always held up as the foundation of our country, the character and the people that we always aspire to be, if they're terrible, in some ways are we saying nobody meets that standard and we're all terrible?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's almost like who's leading this? Who's behind this? I have some strong feelings about some of these things, but this is one that I would just keep to myself. I'm not that offended by a statue. I do think there should be a little plaque by it that basically says, hey, here's the other side of this story, and here's how you can find out more about this person. It feels like there's a compromise we could reach, a middle ground to keep these things in play, but also expand the definition of what we're presenting to the public about who this person was.
I mean, I would think that would be a happy medium, right? I mean, it would be, I think, solve for those who feel like the entire story isn't being told. That way, you're telling the entire story. You're putting the statue or the monument in context, which is always good. So I think there are ways to do it, and I just think we get so far afield, and that this, especially when it comes to statues and recognizing people, it quickly gets just muddled. And so it's a question of
what's weird about this. If Thomas Jefferson could magically appear in front of the New York City Council about his statue, he would demand it be taken down. I read a little bit about Jefferson this week. He was huge on history is for the living. The world is for the living. He was never big on statues, historical legacies. He firmly believed that Thomas Jefferson would be appalled that we haven't really completely, that we're not on version 5 of the Constitution. Thomas Jefferson.
He's an extremely complicated figure, but he was
very. There was no sentimentality to him at all.
No, but he was also very progressive in some ways. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at him, another thing we like to mythologize, religion with our founders. Thomas Jefferson was a theist.
Yeah,
and as far as religion goes, I mean, he was very New Agey almost in his approach to God and religion. I mean, he owned a Quran, his own personal copy of the Quran. He owned a Bible. He read the Torah. Yeah. He was all about reading from multiple religions and taking from multiple religions the good and creating his own philosophy. He was well read. He was a fervent believer in public education, and he was the reason that we have public education. He started that. So, and again, obviously you have slavery and all of the negatives that he perpetuated with that. But again, it goes to say that he's a very complicated figure. So, a lot of bad from him, but also a lot of good. And so, again, where do you draw those lines? How do you contextualize the entire person and all of that?
And can you extract slavery from somebody from that time? Can you say, listen, slavery was a common practice. It was a common practice in the United States. It was a common
Great
practice
Britain.
Almost all over the world at this point. It would be impossible. It would be like judging a politician today strictly for using social media. I understand that slavery and social media, that's a terrible analogy. But how can you take somebody, separate them from the historical context of the time, and then apply a different set of morality?
That's
what that never works.
No, because I mean, and slavery was a common practice at the time, and common practice going all the way back to, early, BC.
I can't remember a time of recorded history where there wasn't slavery.
So what's interesting to me is
until now,
if you go to Rome, and you see like the statues of Caesar Augustus or some of these like Roman Empire figures, I mean, all of them are technically out of vogue in today's society because they all own slavery. They perpetuated conquest. I mean, they, destroyed entire civilizations.
American Indians enslaved each other all the time.
Well, and so did Africans, black Africans on the African continent. So, that was commonplace there. So, I mean, the entire world engaged in slavery of one form or another of other people. I mean, that was just the way it was. And the Romans engaged in slavery. I mean, they had slaves from Africa, from Asia, from Europe. I mean, anybody could be a slave, white, black, any.
You got an empire that big, you got to have a lot of slaves to run it.
Right.
You got to have a lot of free labor.
So, and many of the Romans, if you were an affluent Roman, you had slaves.
Sure,
so
it was
again,
just part of the day.
But it's interesting. So do you take down those statues? Like, how do you contextualize the entire, Roman Empire and the growth and peak of the Roman Empire? Because you really can't. It was all built on the backs of slaves, essentially. And
how do you take Jefferson and how do you reconcile his hypocrisy? How do you say somebody that could write a document that has set the standard for 270 some odd years on government and freedom and what government's true role is, and not granting rights but protecting rights? How do you square that with his personal behavior?
Yeah, well, and Jefferson
I don't know how you do that.
Jefferson was an enigma and a frustrating enigma, and also a hypocrite, right? Because he believed and said that slavery was wrong personally, and he hated it, but yet he still owned slaves. So, he was somebody who said he thought the institution was wrong, it needed to go away eventually, but yet he still took part in it. So how can someone do that?
And if I recall history correctly, wasn't one of Jefferson's problems is he was always in debt? He was always into some failed business scheme, something. He was always looking for money. And part of his economic problems, people have said that's what kept him owning slavery, because he had to, because he was trying to economically get ahead. But one of the problems he had is he was always kind of disadvantaged. Jefferson was the guy who was always kind of participating in some kind of get-rich-quick scheme that always blew up in his face. If I recall from our Smithsonian visit many years ago, he was in the nail business, for example, of making nails. He had a foundry. He always had some sort of hustle going, trying to make money, and it never seemed to work.
Oh yeah, he had several. I remember I visited Monticello, his residence in Virginia, and they talked about all of his business ventures. There were many.
If Thomas Jefferson can't have a statue, then who does? Are we just saying that building statues out of political figures is a terrible idea because they're all human and they're all flawed and they all have done bad things, and we just should stop doing it? Is that what we're saying?
I think part of the problem why there's such a strong reaction is because there has been a failure to acknowledge the other side. So the historical figures that were African American that achieved, they don't have the corresponding statues and representation, which we could and should do. We don't even have a national museum on the impact of slavery in this country or on segregation. We kind of hush that up, and we don't give that the visibility that it probably should, and as part of that same context. So without tearing statues down necessarily of anybody who was involved or had an association of slavery, what we could do is acknowledge the impact of slavery on the other side by putting up statues of slaves who fought against the laws of the time. And acknowledging the human toll of slavery, but we don't really do that. We don't have those museums. We don't have those statues, and really even in our history books, those figures and events are given very little space.
I saw a tweet that I think this week was the 75th anniversary of the Lucille Ball show being launched or something.
Oh, yeah.
And
there's that new movie that's coming out with Nicole Kidman
and Javier Bardem.
Yeah.
That looks pretty good. But the tweet was, it was a video of the classic, the candies coming off the thing, and her and Ethel can't keep up, and they start eating it and all that shit. And the person who did the tweet basically says, back to a better time in America, or back to a more simpler time, or where things were better, referencing that in the 50s, it was a simpler, by default, better time in America than it is today. And I clicked on it to see the replies because you know what's coming. Better for whom?
Right.
Who was this better for? In 1951, Jim Crow was all the rage. We had to find a second-class citizens in the United States. Is that better? It just reminded me of, how do you look back on anything?
I mean, if you were black or gay or a woman, it was. I mean, the
50s
the
were
laws
a
were
great
so
time.
restrictive. Yeah.
I mean, you had your Happy Days crowd if you were white in a family, and then everything else. Nothing was geared towards anything other than white culture in 1951.
Everything was geared toward that end. I think that was a difference. I mean, a few of the positives was you had this much, I think, stronger importance placed on community. Yeah. That's when community associations and organizations were at their zenith, like Kiwanis
church
Club
membership,
and Rotary clubs and church membership. You had interestingly enough, taxes were much higher in the 50s because there's this belief and mindset that corporations needed to pay more so that money could go into the common good.
Yeah, that's gone.
So I mean, there was a lot of that mentality where that gave way to this idea and this approach of just individual first and freedom before anything, and my freedom matters more than anything else, or the collective. So that's the one thing that was probably pretty positive that's gone by the wayside societally and culturally. But yeah, I think if you were a member of various groups, I mean, you were not given the same rights and you did not have the same visibility in society. You just didn't. I mean, even Lucille Ball, if you read up, and I think the new movie talks about this, her and Ricky Ricardo having to fight studio bosses to be able to do the show in the first place. And the they actually opened up the first country club that was open up to minorities as well, because at that time there was not a single country club in the U.S. that would allow in minorities. I mean, which is crazy.
Didn't they too? They slept in the same room, but they slept in separate beds.
They
right?
did, yeah.
Okay, and that continued through the '60s, like the Dick Van Dyke Show. I think him and Mary Tyler Moore, they slept in small twin beds.
Oh, do you know the other thing? They were not allowed to acknowledge or to say the word pregnant on the show. So when she was pregnant on the show, her character was like, they couldn't actually say that. So they found ways around it to be able to talk about it and imply that she was pregnant without actually saying it, because that wasn't allowed on TV back then.
So I guess the better time in the 50s was when we all acted like children, where we couldn't talk about women getting pregnant on TV or married couples sleeping in the same room.
Well, and you forget, and this is kind of going off on a tangent, but on one of my trips recently on the plane back, I was watching this show about the codes, the moral codes in Hollywood, because prior to the 1940s, there were no moral codes. And so you had this period from like the 1920s to about 1940 where it was anything goes. And I mean, there were films that got pretty graphic and risque in their content. And then you had the set of moral codes that was imposed, and none of that was allowed. And so it became so restrictive until those codes were lifted, I think, in the late 60s. And it's just interesting how society kind of ebbs and flows. Like American society, we went through a period in the 20s where it was very much like anything goes attitude, both on the screen as well as, in culture. And then that kind of got stamped out by the 1950s, and it was much more family centered. And then we came out of that with the 60s and feminism. So it's weird how we just kind of go up and down. I mean, I think we're always progressing, and this goes back to there was a historian who said this. It's always like, 3 steps forward, 1 step backward in America. So we inch forward, but, we go backwards sometimes. The Trump era was a good example of that. So it's just, it is interesting how we do that. But yeah, there's times in American history where you can go back, and there were some pretty, I think, progressive things that happened, and then there was reaction to that, and then that was stamped down.
I didn't ask you, where did you travel to last week?
So
your travel schedule is not slowing down, by the way.
So I went on my first trip abroad.
Okay.
So I was in Italy and Switzerland.
Oh, wow.
So I just did a week where I hit Rome, Milan, and Zurich.
Was this
by
planned?
train.
Did you know you were going to do this?
I really kind of planned them last month to 6 weeks, because I found a really great travel deal. So I was able to get an airline ticket for about $675.
Wow, that's pretty good.
Round trip. And so I started piecing together this trip kind of last minute. And it went well. Had to get tested for COVID going there and coming back. But other than that, I was surprised. I mean, Europe, at least Italy and Switzerland were pretty open. Main difference is you have to show your vaccine card to enter museums and to eat in restaurants. But there isn't really any restrictions on like crowd sizes anymore.
I gotcha.
Which is interesting. So
it's interesting that Italy is that open after the punishing
because
year
they were hit so hard, and they had such a significant lockdown for so long. Yeah.
We went to Washington last week to wine country. It was nice. The Walla Walla is the big area of wine production in Washington.
Oh, okay.
Just skip it. Their wines are horrible.
Is that in the eastern part of the state?
It's in
or center.
It's kind of in the south central part of the state. So I thought the entire state was just one big lush forest.
Yeah.
No, we were in the part where really they get under 5 inches of rain a year, and it's considered almost a desert.
Wow, I didn't even know there was like desert in Washington.
I didn't know this either. So if you're going on a wine trip to Washington, go to the Red Mountain area. The Red Mountain area is superior to Walla Walla. So I live in Missouri. Missouri has a wine industry. You can't see me. I'm air quoting this. Their wines, they suck. They're terrible. Don't even drink them. They're just, to say they're shit is not, even that's not enough.
Missouri listeners are not going to be too happy with
anybody who lives in Missouri who drinks wine and doesn't think Missouri wine is crap, you're just flat wrong, and you know that.
Yeah.
But like Missouri wine has that kind of inky, kind of cottonmouthy taste. It's the same type of soil content, I guess, in the Walla Walla area. So if you're going to go to wine and you want something that is more like Napa, go to the Red Mountain area, not the Walla Walla area.
Have you been to the area in Oregon that's supposed to be the wine country there? That's supposed
we
to
have
be really
not,
good?
but it's one of those things that...
Is it the Willamette Valley, something like that?
I think so.
Yeah.
We've been to Washington, we've been to Napa a bunch, and it's hard to beat the Napa.
Yeah,
If
I did
it's
that for the
not-
first time this year, and I have to say, like Napa,
Love it.
it's just amazing. And it's such a large area too. I never
Yeah.
realized how just massive
It's a giant
it is.
farm area.
Yeah,
So I didn't tell you I want to talk about this in warm-ups, but the whole kind of great resignation, the fact that we've learned now that in August, like 4.5 million people dropped out of the workforce that just aren't looking for a job
Yeah.
anymore. And that they feel in September it's going to be another huge number. And the debate or the theory is, could all of these people just deciding to leave the workforce somehow permanently change the way America works? And I'm all for it. If 4.5 million people left in August, I hope double that left in September. If there's one institution that needs a giant kick right in the ass, to me, it's the world of work.
yeah.
Everything I think about traditional kind of, we're white collar office folks.
Mm-hmm.
Everything I think about that world has just feels antiquated. It feels old. It feels in no way set up to support the worker, what you need to do, what you want out of work. And I hope one of the things that COVID, one of its lasting kind of legacies is maybe it permanently reshapes work a little bit. Maybe it gives a little bit of more power to the people who are filling those jobs, and they use that power to shape the world of work in a different way.
Because the world of work hasn't adapted even as we've progressed technologically. As rapidly as we have, work has just kind of remained. The 40-hour work week, the idea that you clock in and out of the office. There's so many aspects and facets to work that haven't changed, and finally it's starting to change. And who knew that it would take a pandemic to do that?
Well, it took something, again, that exposed a massive lie. Everybody needs to be in the office every day.
Yeah.
No, they don't. And the bitch of it is as workers, we've all known this for years. We've been promoting this idea for years.
Right.
Suddenly, once that Band-Aid got ripped off because of the pandemic, I think there's a big kind of, see, I told you this would work. And if you don't believe me or you're holding this back when you kind of knew this would work, what else around here are you putting me through for no real reason?
Yeah. Well, and the evidence, you can see it with the companies that are just offloading their massive office spaces, which are all on the market now.
But where is the world of work heading? If you kind of project out, I'm much closer to the end for my career, which God thank you for that. You've still got 25-ish more years or 20 more years, or hell, by the time you get around to your retirement benefits from the government, I mean, Social Security will probably be 68 to 70 by then.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised.
I mean, we're in the next, for the rest of your career, or the immediate 5, 6, 7, 8 year run for your career, how do you see things changing? And is there a list of things that kind of are your demands anymore that, hey, I really want to see this in work settings and work environments?
Yeah, well, I mean, just personally, I mean, remote flexible is essential now. Like there's no question about that. Like, I mean, if that's, not part of the job, then it's not something I consider, and I think there needs to be, flexibility too in terms of, benefits and what those benefits look like. That's something that has also changed was starting to change before the pandemic, but has now changed even more so, after the pandemic. And I think companies are also realizing too that, time-wise, like they have to provide employees with a pathway for advancement and growth that's realized much sooner than probably would have been done in the past. I think employees, because it's so competitive now, employees aren't going to wait around, several years to be able to have the opportunity to advance because they can go somewhere else in a highly competitive marketplace. So companies need to be able to provide that up front. Mm-hmm. If you're a parent, there needs to be there's been this escalation of maternity and paternity time off, paid time off that's companies are kind of in wars to outdo each other on as well. So that's an aspect to it. But yeah, I think there's many aspects at play, particularly I think when it comes to white collar jobs, and then even I think in blue collar, which is really struggling right now because they can't retain people. I mean, you can see it with in retail and in fast food with the signs on the windows.
That's the worst part about traveling is service has just fallen
completely by the wayside. Yeah,
there's no expectations, there's no effort anymore. And by the way, anybody who can hear my voice that owns a business that works with a customer. When a customer walks into your place of business, don't start by explaining how the experience is going to suck because 3 of your employees didn't show up today. That's not my problem.
No, that's not.
I don't care. That is
a
you problem. Do I get a discount? You booked me for full price. Now you're telling me that the reason everything is slow or late is because you don't have employees. Why is that my issue? Don't make your service problems your customers' issues.
I'm not going to.
God, that drives me crazy.
I'm not going to ask you to name this business, but what type of business was it?
It was a winery in Washington.
Gotcha. And so And so
we paid for like tastings and rooms and all this.
And to tell you up front.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Brandon, I was in Lowe's the other day and a very nice young woman was trying to help me find a jig I was looking for.
Yeah.
I didn't expect her to know exactly where it was. It's kind of a weird thing. But while she was looking it up, she looked at me and said, "Why aren't you just buying this off Amazon?"
What?
And I kind of said, "I can't argue with that. You're correct. I just bought it off Amazon." I don't want Amazon to win by default, but if you're not even going to try, what
kind of employee, would suggest that you go elsewhere?
But to her, this 20-year-old young woman working, it was the most logical thing for her to say. She's grown up her whole life not going to the store, just going to Amazon. Back to work real quick. And we could do 3 hours on how service is just absolutely tanking at this point in time. But I heard somebody the other day say, okay, I'm going to approach a 25-year-old and say, I'm going to lay out your career in broad strokes for you. Okay. So you're 25. You're probably, by the time you get to retirement age, all of these benefits are going to push probably, let's just say till you're 70. You can draw Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, all of that stuff. Because as you already know, you have to work to have health insurance.
Yeah.
So already you're committing to 50 years in somebody's employment because you have to have health insurance.
Welcome to America. Yep.
Welcome to America. Okay. So I'm going to need you to work the next 45 or 50 years of your life. And there's a couple of things you're going to have to avoid along the way. Number one, getting sick. Because you may have health insurance, but if you get really sick, you're going to financially wipe yourself out, and you're never going to hit that retirement thing. You're going to have to, if I were you, I'd avoid getting married. 51% of marriages into divorce, you just financially tanked yourself. I don't know. You'd be very, very careful about doing that. Oh, and your career isn't going to be your father's or your mother's where it was a constant incremental step up. It's going to have 5 or 6 stop and starts.
Yep.
You're going to lose ground sometimes. You're going to be up. You're going to be down. And I need you to do all of that so that when you hit 70, if you're lucky, you might get 15 years of what you want to do. If you've avoided all of these trappings and if you've saved enough, you might be able to retire. How ridiculous does that sound?
And when you put it that way, it really does, right?
Is that way fairly accurate?
And it is. And, in this day and age, you have to add in the threat of automation and, what type of jobs are going to be displaced by automation.
That's the other part. Halfway up your career, your industry is just going to go away.
And you have to enter a new industry, a new vertical, and learn new skills. And you have to be prepared for that. It's like whiplash.
And half the employers you're at, I hate to tell you this, you're just going to hate. You're going to hate the company. You're going to not like the people. Half of the time that you've spent in work is going to be with people you'd probably not choose to be around.
Yeah.
Is that what you want to do? I am so amused at Ben Shapiro and Hugh Hewitt and some of the conservative podcasts I listen to as they're just scratching their head and just can't figure out why so many people are dropping out. It's got to be all these government monies we're giving people, right? And they just never fall to the obvious. Maybe it just really sucks. And a lot of people took this last year and a half to figure out ways that they don't want to go back.
Yeah.
That seems like the most obvious answer.
Yeah, I think so. And the question is how long that holds up. And again, how companies respond and what the jobs of the future look like. because I think companies will have to respond. Employers will have to, because as the labor shortage continues, they won't have a choice. If they need labor, and they're going to have to compromise.
So I used to always be confused about why haven't businesses banded together and just said, we're out of the insurance business. We're done.
Yeah.
We're just not paying for it. We're done. It's part of that hook that keeps you there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've met with our financial guys talking about some pre-retirement steps, and he's like, your number one goal is you got to find insurance somehow. If you decide to retire early, your number one expense is insurance. So you can allocate $25,000 to $35,000 a year to pay for it until you hit, is it 65 now? And it'll probably go up by the time. He's like, that's your one thing. And to say, well, in 20 years, they'll certainly have it solved. They will. I don't.
Because we've done so well now. Yeah.
Brandon, think about how different work would be if your health insurance wasn't tied to it.
Oh, it would give you so much more flexibility.
Sure.
You could actually do what you're passionate about rather than feeling like you have to lock yourself in based on health insurance, particularly if you have a family where that's the utmost thing and priority in your mind.
And culturally, haven't we just gone overboard on work? Haven't we? We just define ourselves by our jobs way too much.
Oh, yeah.
We invest way too much time in work. I always hated it when somebody says, we're a family here. Well, then I'm not working here because I have a family. And they're way more important than you people. And if you make me pick, you're going to lose every time. You're not my family.
But that's the frustrating part, right? Because you spend more time at work with your work colleagues than you do your own family.
Then we're not family just because we're forced to spend time together.
Right.
Although that's a definition, I think, for a lot of families, for people who are forced to spend time with. Can you believe Thanksgiving's like 20, 30?
No.
We're like 33 days away from Thanksgiving.
Something like that. And I hate this time of year because then once Thanksgiving hits, like the year just goes by that fast. And then you have Christmas and then it just boom.
Once Thanksgiving hit, the year's gone. Where did this year go?
I don't know. I feel like we blinked and 2021 was over. 2020 was an excruciatingly long year because of the pandemic. And then it's just weird. 2021,
So usually at Halloween, I ask my wife, do you remember what we did for New Year's? Nope. I can't remember.
I don't remember what I did.
I can't remember what we did for New Year's.
Yeah.
Are you going to blow out New Year's this year because there might be an opportunity to?
I'm thinking. I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, but I think that after the last two, I mean, people are ready to.
Once you cross a certain age threshold, you start celebrating East Coast New Year's. Everybody goes to bed at 11. Yeah, New Year's just isn't our holiday at this point in time.
Yeah, I don't know. I thought about going somewhere New Year's. I have no desire to go do the ball drop, though, in New York City. Because you get stuck there. You can't go to the bathroom. You're there for like 8 hours. Like, that does not seem appealing to me.
Pressed in a crowd on a cold day in New York or go to jail for 6 months. I think I'd do a 6-month jail sentence.
Yeah.
There's no way. And those people are all over you and all that. That just bothers the shit out of me.
Yeah.
When people rub up against you or bump on you in a crowd, not a fan.
Something you're into.
Yeah. The ball drop is not that's certainly not my gig.
Well, it's like you can see it on TV without having all the
be nice and warm
issues. Yeah, exactly. Being out there in the crowd.
Let's end with: are you going to get your Truth social account? Did you get pre-approved for Trump's new social media platform?
So I was reading something about this. It's not even in beta though yet, is it? This is all proposal, right?
Yes.
And he has struggled with this because he's been for a year now working on a social platform and hasn't been able to come up with anything.
Did you read that statement where he basically said it already has a valuation of like 1.7 billion or something, and he's walking through, and it's like, there's
no substance yet to it, so it doesn't exist. I don't get it. Whatever happened to that one that his Jason Miller came up with?
Yeah. I think it's Getter.
Oh, Getter, yeah.
What I loved is that somehow they got a hold of the pitch deck from the Trump, what is it, the MTG? I thought it was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's like Trump Media Technology Group, TMTG. Oh, okay.
That's the name of the company?
Trump Media Technology. That's really
TMTG.
Close to the Turtles.
Yeah, that is.
So I forgot what I was going to say because I was so fascinated on the turtle thing. But okay, no. Okay, so
the pitch deck.
They found they got a hold of his pitch deck to investors, and there's a slide where TMTG is like the Middle Earth, and it's pulling all of these satellite sites into it, and one of them is Getter. So basically, in the pitch, He basically said Parler, Frank Speech, Getter, those all suck and don't count. Those will all be collapsed into, or their audiences or content would all be taken over by Truth Social or whatever the shit he is. So basically, all the people that went out and started one of these that were hoping to curry his favor to get on their platform, he just took a big dump all over. And if this thing ever gets launched, with who knows if it will, I would think it would be the predominant conservative-only social media site.
Yeah, you would think.
I mean, I'd get an account for it just to see what Trump does.
I mean, did you see his latest statement that he put out?
My favorite was the one he put out a couple days ago where, hey, Republicans ain't voting if you don't put me back in as president. Did you see that one?
I did not see that
Then
one.
He came back later and said, okay, I'm going to need $45 each out of all of you to put me back in president. I wish I were lying to you or making this up.
But no,
I'm not.
He had one out a couple days ago, too, where he was very disparaging against Liz Cheney, but then also managed to be sexist about it because he said nobody could stand to look at her, which he put that in there.
Of course.
And then the latest one that I
God.
think was just today was he said that Election Day last November was the insurrection and that January 6th was the protest, something to that effect. So I
think 9 Republicans in the House did vote to basically refer Bannon to the DOJ because he didn't respond to things. I thought that was...
Hold him in contempt.
That was some progress.
That's good. And they have to, they have to exercise the full weight and authority of their power because this is par for the course for Trump and his people. They will test the limits completely. Yeah. And if people like Bannon can't be held in contempt for defying a subpoena, then, what's the point? If
I was Trump, I'd say I want SEAL Team 6 to pick him up. Kick his goddamn front door down, all of it. Yeah. Send the message.
Exactly. No. That's how I feel.
If we're a country of laws, we're a country of laws. They apply to you. The United States Congress said, come talk to us. You don't have a choice.
Right.
Executive privilege for an ex-president doesn't exist.
Well, and Bannon wasn't even employed in the White House at that time. He had been let go how many years before that? It's so not even relevant.
Brandon, is being a lawyer a lot easier than we thought? Because apparently you can just make up any shit you want.
Yeah, how can lawyers for the administration even argue this and still not face consequences for that? Is there no, I don't get it. You still have Sidney Powell who hasn't been disbarred yet.
Sidney Powell came out and said, well, where am I going to get all the money to pay for all these lawsuits that are against me? Dumbass, you should have thought of that before you started.
Yeah.
I certainly hope that Bannon gets compelled by law enforcement to come to testify to Congress.
I do. Yeah, it needs to happen.
So the only thing that's going to keep the Democrats from getting wiped out in 2022 is some sort of slow drip of information about Trump and the Republicans about January 6th. The only strategy left is to basically make the Republicans, using their own actions and own words, so repugnant that they stay home.
Yeah.
That's the only strategy you can play.
Force people like Mark Meadows to testify.
They all testify, all of them. And I think if you're Biden, you're going to see him get a little bit more aggressive with it as they know that's the primary strategy moving forward.
Right.
I don't think you can keep the House, but you might be able to keep the Senate.
I think the Senate is possible, yeah. And I think it's possible there are some potential Senate pickups there in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin that could be had. So
I heard my first interview with Herschel Walker as a candidate. Wow, is he terrible.
Oh, well, and everybody's been saying that. I did not know that, yeah.
And there's still some recruiting efforts going on with Republicans to try to get people to run for Senate seats, right?
There are, yeah, that are, and gosh, I'm trying to think of which ones are still.
I know Hogan in Maryland, but I think he's pretty much said he's done.
Yeah, he's
not going to do it.
No, and so yeah, there's that. We still don't have an answer yet on whether Ron Johnson is running again for re-election.
Do not. He may retire.
He could retire. That's kind of still undefined. Yeah, I don't know.
Grassley's running now, so
well, and Grassley is 89, so yeah, he'll be 93 when he's up again, 94.
There has to be something done about that, doesn't there?
There should be. We just can't
keep allowing that to happen. God. What do you want to end on tonight? You doing anything fun, special? I mean, your travel should be done, shouldn't it? Unless you see another great deal.
Yeah, pretty much. I may do a domestic trip before the end of the year just to make status on Delta, so that's possible. But I think I just need one like
You need
domestic.
to make a business trip somehow.
Yeah.
Are you traveling at all for business or?
Not right now, no. I mean, my company still hasn't really opened, gone back to business travel yet, so that's kind of out of the way. But yeah, I may do some just weekend jaunt somewhere before end of the year. We'll see.
Yeah, I think our travel. Well, no, we're going to Colorado in November, but I think that's about it. But like I said, once you hit Thanksgiving, for us, kids start coming home from college, and then we got to start
too
working
busy.
that out, and there's trips to in-laws and stuff, and it just gets crazy at that.
Yeah, the holidays just add all kinds of stress on top of that.
I'm not a big holiday guy. Never have been.
Yeah.
It's the worst 6 weeks of the year. I generally don't like once you get out of the little kid phase.
Yeah.
There's no little kids in our family anymore, so Christmas is great. I get to watch, my brother-in-law get another pair of pants. Great, get some more towels or something. It's just Christmas.
Well, there's all the scheduling
kids.
and the stress and getting everybody together, and it's just frustrating. Plus, this time of year, like the days are getting shorter, which I hate. We're
sucks.
quickly approaching where it's going to get dark at 5 o'clock, which I hate.
Cold.
Yeah, not a fan.
So, for Christmas, do you do any traveling for that, or is that all here in Kansas
No,
City?
Usually all here in Kansas City. All my family's here, so usually we go over to my sister's, and kind of everybody comes over there. So that's kind of the way it goes.
It just doesn't. There's just nothing about the country that has a holiday feel right now,
Yeah.
or when we get there. I mean, now the big thing is the supply chain is going to screw.
Well, yeah, there's going to be
Christmas
shortages.
up.
You won't be able to get gifts. I mean, some of these retailers are saying that their their stock for the holidays isn't going to come until February, so that's going to impact a lot of people.
Is it really going to be a crime if you have to wait for something?
Oh, it's the end of Christmas.
I don't know.
We can't have Christmas if you don't get the
Fox News is all over this. That Biden's going to kill Christmas.
If you don't get
with
your
the supply chain
smartwatch,
problems.
it's not Christmas.
Well, and you were talking about family leave. Fox is all over. Apparently, this whole dock situation in Los Angeles, where ships can't get into the port of LA to unload, is all because Pete Buttigieg is taking 2 months of parental leave.
That's such a non-story.
I mean, that's all over conservative media.
Because apparently we have one person who can only work on that issue, and an agency head. We don't have an entire department of people within DOT.
Brandon, I don't know if you know this, but a man, he didn't even have a baby.
Right.
Physically, he's not recovering from anything. He's just hanging out with his 2 children. He's just bonding with his new kids, Brandon. What's he even doing?
Well, it's interesting because people like Tucker Carlson and others have brought up the whole thing, like, why do we even have paternity leave? Why is that a thing?
And that's the same dumb shit that will say, well, I wonder why people are going back to work. Really? You do? Work was designed after World War II for men who are getting out of the military. It's a completely bogus setup that needs to change.
A lot with it, then definitely needs to change.
Are you watching anything, reading anything new this week?
Let's see. I watched the season finale of Ted Lasso.
Yeah, that was good.
Which was
that
good.
Rebounded nicely.
I really liked it.
I don't like the fact that I'm not going to ruin it, but
don't
character
ruin
went bad.
It. Yes. So that was very entertaining to watch. I will say that there is this. There's an element of wokeism that bothers me a lot. I was reading an article where there was a contributor who was griping about Ted Lasso, the fact that there are some central minority characters that everybody likes, but the claim was that these minority characters are viewed through the prism of the white characters, and they don't really have their own stories. And one of the claims was, one of these characters is one of the soccer football players who's widely liked and has his own arc on this season. And the claim was that he is, not given negative qualities. He's made out to be too good, and that he's not represented because, in reality, people have all these facets to him. Then there was another article that spoke of another character who's a minority who actually turns out to have a bad side, and then claimed that character was made out to be the boogeyman, and he was the minority. And so I'm like, you can't have it both ways. Like, you have one person claiming that there isn't a bad side to one minority character and one that is complaining because there is. And I'm just like,
this is why I can agree with you historically on the context of a Jefferson statue, but I can't get on board with you because of stupid shit like that.
Right. So they
and you can draw a connection between the two.
Yeah.
That's just dumb.
It gets just ridiculous and petty. But no, I did see the season finale of that, which is good. I've started watching the morning show again because this next season of that is that's one of my favorites.
The only thing bad with Ted Lasso is I think they're going to end it after next season because Sudeikis is like, I've got movies to make. I got other things to do. So
yeah, there's only one more season left. So
it's going to be a short run, but it's a quality show.
Did you watch Midnight Mass on Netflix? I know we talked about it.
I have not, but
it's so good.
Two or three more podcasts have said you need to watch this.
So good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you watched Squid Game?
I've started that. I actually started that on my way back home in the air. So, yeah, that one is. I've watched 2 episodes. I'm on episode 3.
Is this some sort of? I think I know the 4 corners of the plot, but is this an anti-capitalism, anti-corporate message thing they're sending? Because these people are playing this game where they die if they don't win, but they're really trying to get rid of their debt, right?
Right. So it's a broadside against the financial system more so than capitalism. The fact that people can so easily get into debt, but then it's very difficult to get out of debt, and that the mechanisms for getting out of debt are all like loan sharks or extra legal. I think where you face violent repercussions, so mafia and so forth on trying, and then you get stuck, and it just keeps spiraling and spiraling, and so these people are desperate for a way to get out of debt. And hence they join this game and they put their lives at stake because the alternative is so much worse. I think the one thing that's pretty striking is there's an opportunity for some of these people to exit the game and not face the possibility of dying. But life as they know it is so bad with no opportunity, no end in sight to their debt that they're willing to go back in even for that minuscule chance at being able to win and pay their debts off. So it's kind of bizarre from that standpoint.
God, I wonder how many people would actually do that. I imagine it'd be a higher percentage than you think.
Yeah,
Say
probably.
You're going to do something incredibly dangerous that there's a more than 50% chance you're going to die.
If you feel like you have no way out otherwise, if life is that bad, I mean, people are willing to take risks, that they otherwise wouldn't take.
Well, the fact that that's the #1 show in the world or has been.
And it has been for weeks now, which is crazy.
I think that tells you how that message resonates with people right now. All right, that's our hour. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks for listening to 2 Men in the Middle. Make sure to give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Check out our website at 2meninthemiddle.com. Drop us an email at 2meninthemiddle@gmail.com or tweet at us at 2 Men in the Middle. We'll see you next week.